Hello, my name is Dr. Mike Ribble, and I want to welcome you to this first Digital Citizenship Summit in Africa there in Nigeria. I wish that I could be there personally to welcome everyone and talk to you about my journey as far as digital citizenship, but some things just don't work out, and here I am trying to share a little bit about where I've been with digital citizenship, as well as some of the others that are there in person to talk to you about it as well. Again, my name is Dr. Mike Ribble, and I've been working on this topic of digital citizenship for just over 12 years now. And it's been a long, wonderful journey meeting a lot of great people like your sponsors, as Tola has been an immense help as far as getting this going. Rob Jacqueline, we had a conversation almost a year and a half ago talking about this idea of having a summit there in Nigeria, and now you're having it. So it's exciting to see how we can make these connections and then make them happen within this world and this idea of how do we look at technology in relationship to ourselves and to each other. Rob had asked me to talk a little bit about my journey, a little bit about my history of digital citizenship, and I thought I'd share a few of those thoughts with you as you get started into this summit. My history, as I mentioned, goes back over a decade, talking about this idea of how do we look at technology in relationship to how we interact with one another. I began looking at digital citizenship as a classroom teacher. I began as a secondary science teacher, and I was one of the first in my department to begin to look at the possibilities of how technology can help our students and where it can take them. I don't think that any one of us could have imagined the explosion of personal devices and the changes that it has brought about to us. The ideas that we now share and the connection that we have, very much like this video, that only about 20 years ago would have been very, very difficult for us to be able to share. When I went back to Kansas State University to work on my doctorate, I began working with a person by the name of Dr. Gerald Bailey. Dr. Bailey had a great influence on me as far as what the concept of being a digital citizen is. He was very technologically literate, but also more so to the idea of how do we connect as people. When I was taking a class from Dr. Bailey, I remember about 2003, he began talking about this topic of becoming good digital citizens. And when I went to see Dr. Bailey after his course, I asked him, what did he mean by digital citizenship? And he began to talk about this concept of where do we want to be as users of technology, not just being able to consume the technology, but how do we interact? Dr. Bailey was very much ahead of his time as far as conceptualizing these ideas and where it could take us. After talking to Dr. Bailey, I told him, I said, this is the topic that I want to focus on. And like very many good professors, one of the things that he said to me is, whatever you do, pick a topic that you are comfortable with for at least 5 years. Well, now it's been almost 12 years later, and I'm still talking about this topic. one of the main things that Dr. Bailey suggested was, how do you frame this idea of digital citizenship? So I began to look at all of the artifacts that were around at the time, and at that moment there was very little about digital citizenship as a topic area. But there was other ideas that were out there: digital etiquette, ideas of netiquette, how do we interact and what do we do when we're online. But again, we were still many years away before the explosion of smartphones and devices like the iWatch, other Fitbits, other devices, Google Glasses, all of those. So we were still in sort of the infancy of what is digital citizenship. So I began to break it down and look at all the different aspects. And the more I looked at it, the more I came back to digital citizenship is citizenship. We must look at it on this scope of how do we interact with each other. And there are some that believe that we should drop the digital, and I hope that in the future we will be able to drop that, and all of it will be part of how do we interact with each other. But it's still new enough that we have to talk about what does it mean to be a digital citizen in relationship to our citizenship within our city, country, and in the world. So as I began to look at and work on my dissertation, I began to talk about these different aspects. And from that, I was very fortunate to begin to work with ISTE, which is the International Society for Technology and Education. ISTE was very interested in this idea of digital citizenship, and as I was finishing my dissertation, they were interested in having me write about this topic. And from that, I was able to write this first book, Digital Citizenship in Schools, and this is the first edition that came out. And from that, all of the different topics that you see about literacy, communication, etiquette, and all the other 9 elements became sort of the frame that I began to talk about of what is digital citizenship. From that, I began to build on that idea and look at how do others look at it. And I began to talk to friends, relatives, and even other people as I traveled around, and found that parents and others were also struggling with this topic. So I began to write on the topic of raising a digital child and what that looked like as a parent, of how digital citizenship became so important. So both of those aspects and both of those books brought me to the realization that I needed to frame this idea in such a way that gave everyone an idea of what is digital citizenship. So I want you to spend a moment and I want you to think about, as you sit there, what is your concept, if you have one, of what is digital citizenship? Take a moment. Think about, what does that mean to you? As I began to frame that idea, I too struggled with, what does it mean? Where does it go? And as I've continued to expand and work with people like Dr. Mary Alice Curran, who's there with you, Dr. Jason Oler, who's also been very integral in my growth in understanding digital citizenship, I began to think of what else can I look at and help to frame this idea. So I began to look at character education, about empathy and ethics and how all of these tie together. And I truly believe that as people, we have to be aware of all of these different aspects and how do we help each other to become better digital citizens. So in the past 12 years, I have continued to travel, and as I said, I wish that I could be there with you to have this discussion with you, but I've had this discussion in many different countries, and it's surprising how alike we all are when it comes to this idea of digital citizenship. We're all struggling with these changes, this new idea, and we are in a watershed time in history. I tell students that it's hard for them to realize, but they are living in a time that I believe will be looked back upon as one of those major turning points in the history of people. Very much like the printing press was a change time for us as people. And now it's happening so rapidly as we look at how quickly things like the cell phone was only 10 years ago this year that the iPhone actually became sort of that default concept of what is a smartphone. There are many others that are out there, but iPhones and their followers have all changed who we are and how we communicate with one another. As I continue to develop and focus on different aspects, I've also been able to work with ISTE and worked on a second edition of Digital Citizenship in Schools and further defined what I saw. And then finally, this last year, came up with a third edition of Digital Citizenship in Schools, which was so important to me to tell that story in that third edition, because it includes people like Dr. Curran, as I mentioned earlier, but also people like Marty Park, who works at the University of Kentucky, and the people at Lester B. Pearson School Board up in Canada, who lived this idea of digital citizenship. I'm excited to tell you that I'm again back working with many of those people who have had a long history with digital citizenship, and we are beginning to build the next iteration of what we foresee as digital citizenship. We hope that this next level of digital citizenship will not just frame the idea of the concept of digital citizenship, but will actually move us forward of how do we, as educators, as business people, as community members, begin to bring this idea away from just a concept into how do we begin to share and live this idea. I know that that's one of those driving pieces that you will be discussing in the next day and a half of this Digital Citizenship Summit. And again, I wish that I could be there to hear your stories, to hear your ideas of where you want to be and where you want to take this concept. I'm sure that you'll be sharing out those information, and we will be taking that forward to move this idea past this just conceptual to a fully action piece. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come in, speak with you just briefly about digital citizenship, and hope that in the future that we will have more of an opportunity to explain and talk about this with each other and expand on this. So as you are these groundbreaking folks that are taking this idea and building upon it, you will be part of that foundation to share digital citizenship, not only in your community, but throughout the region and internationally as well. Again, thank you for the opportunity, and I wish you a very successful Digital Citizenship Summit there in Nigeria, and hope that everything that you learn and what you take, you can share and help others to become better digital citizens. Thank you, and I wish you all well.